So we got the draft notice to go say, hey, go make videos about plastic in the sea. And it made me really pause for a moment or a few days before I could really think about what I wanted to say, because I realised that my own involvement and my family's involvement with plastics is a very tangled subject. And it'd be very disingenuous for me to say, hey, just go save the planet, without really talking about how we were involved and how we got here, So this isn't a sponsored video. I've been asked to make it. I'm very pleased to be associated with such a good cause. We've only got one planet, and the seas cover 2/3 of the Earth's surface. At the moment, we, as a human race, we're dumping an insane amount of plastic and other things into the ocean. We don't really understand the impact of what we're dumping in there. We don't understand the impact that's going to have on the ocean, or how that will impact the entire environment as a result. It's very easy to think about problems on the other side of the planet as not being our problem, but it is, and that's something we have to live with, and we have to actually find ways to solve this. So before I talk about my involvement in the plastics industry and why some of this is my fault or my family's fault and my part of all this, I want to also talk about how teamseas is going to change this. So teamseas, first of all, teamseas.org, go there and donate, and the idea is we're going to try and raise $30 million, and with each dollar raised, we're going to remove 1 pound of plastic from the sea, which it sounds like a lot, and it is an immense amount of money, and it's an immense amount of plastic as well. So first of all, a lot of my viewers are British, so if you're British, we only actually are trying to raise £21.8 million. So it's not so bad. In fact, actually, if you are British and you go there and donate £1, you're doing more work than an American who donates $1, so we can get a head start with being British. I also realize we've got some Canadian people watching the channel. I love the Canadians. I know there's a joke here somewhere about Canadian dollars not being worth as much as American dollars, but I checked the exchange rate, and it turns out your Canadian dollars are actually worth more as well. So you donate $1 Canadian, you're going to remove more plastic than an American donating $1. So even $1 is going to make a difference. It's going to remove a pound of plastic for every American dollar, which means every Canadian is like 1.3 pounds of plastic and 1.2 pounds of plastic if you're British pounds, something like that. It's fantastic. So the other thing is that why teamseas? Why not other organisations? And there are other organisations. Teamseas are actually splitting their profit, or not profit, they're splitting their income 50%. So every single dollar donated teamseas is going to be split 50-50 to two organisations, Ocean Conservatory and the Ocean Cleanup. There's loads of stuff online about what those guys are doing. I'm not going to go into it here, but basically they're going to try and remove plastic from the ocean. They're going to remove plastic from the rivers going into the ocean, and they're also going to remove plastic from the beaches as well. So it's a three-pronged attack they're working on, and as I say, 30 million pounds of plastic. That's 85 football pitches a foot deep in plastic. That's an immense amount of plastic they're going to remove. And the second thing is we can all make a difference at home, and we can all make a difference in our private and professional lives as well. The Taylor household, we've actually massively reduced our landfill waste in the past 2-3 years. Our contribution to recycling has increased. We've started choosing different products purely because of the packaging it comes in, and we are trying to minimise our waste and our landfill waste, but also we're trying to minimise our recycling waste. But we're putting more and more into recycling every day. And it's not just single-use plastics, it's all forms of plastics. We're trying to use plastics more carefully in our day-to-day lives. But I did at the start of the video talk about me and my family's involvement with plastics, and it's not just recycling at home and home consumption. I'm not quite a millennial. It depends where you put that boundary on. But I'm also not really a Gen X, so I'm somewhere in between. My parents were definitely baby boomers. And I think the reason why I bring this up is because it's very easy to blame the previous generation as to the state of the world it's in. Saying, oh, these guys did that, that's why we're in this situation right now. But I think that's not fair, because I think that especially the things I'm going to talk about, there are Gen A's, the millennials, Gen A's working in these factories and places contributing this problem as it is right now. It is a cross-generational problem that we've got, and it's something that we can solve together as well. So in the late 80s, when I was still quite a young boy, my dad got a job at a plastics factory. He was a computer manager, and as that factory expanded and took over other factories and expanded, he also went up in what he was doing, and it was fantastic. But all of my youth, effectively all my formative years, were based around my dad working at this plastic factory. He worked there from about 1988, 1989 until he retired a few years ago. So it was an immense amount of time. I remember going to work with him over the summer periods, over Easter. I remember going to work with him like late on a Friday night when there were network problems and helping diagnose problems on. I talked last week about thin Ethernet cables, about where a forklift truck had broken Ethernet cable, trying to find these breaks in a big factory. And I learnt a lot about manufacturing. I learnt a lot about how manufacturers and factories work on a politics side, not just a commercial and business side. And that's really helped me in my career today. I've been very privileged to have those experiences. But it also means that plastics have been a big part of my life, and they have effectively paid for, my education. I paid my way through university by these sorts of things. So I'm very aware that this happened. But they're not an evil company, and I need to stress that. They took a lot of pride in the plastics they made. Things like, and every single house in the UK had plastics that came from these factories, these specific factories, not generic, these specific factories. Things like ketchup bottles, and they would change. The big companies would buy from us or buy from competitors depending on price points. But there's a lot of pride in the quality of the work they made. They made thick, high-quality plastic containers, a lot of food containers, because if you made a thicker bottle, it had a lower oxygen permeability, which meant your food stayed fresh longer. So we're not talking about these single-use containers which are using and then throwing away, like cling film wraps, things like that. We're talking about things which will be in your fridge for 2 or 3 months, maybe. I don't go through ketchup bottles that fast. So these are good quality plastics which are actually reducing waste in other areas by preserving food, by keeping food better. Things like paint buckets, things like beer brewing buckets. I've got a homebrew bucket. It is just a bucket, which I know which factory it came from, even though I bought it in a shop, because it's got the logo on the bottom. I've had this bucket 20 years. It's a good quality plastic bucket. Being plastic means I can clean it. These are good uses of plastic. However, I also know we made millions and millions of single-use containers. Things like coleslaw packets, which would last a day. We buy it, we eat all the stuff in it, and we throw it away. And I know growing up we didn't recycle. We didn't have a lot of recycling options where I was growing up. Now we do. Now we have, our councils provides recycling options. So it is different now to it was 20 years ago. But even 30 years ago, 20 years ago. But this is something that I know I've been a part of. I know we made the computer systems made it. But I also want to stress that we did things to try and reduce plastic waste. So the company wasn't just making all these products and just, screw the environment, churn out black smoke. It was all about reducing waste. It's all about lean manufacturing, which means that if you can build the exact number of products that you want to build and you have no waste, you've built them correctly, they're all the right size, all the right quality, then you don't have any waste, which means your costs are going down. So the more you can get into lean manufacturing, the more you can do reducing errors, the better the quality of the customer, the better your profit margin, but also the better for the environment. So there's an awful lot of work that I know my father was involved with, things like counting products coming off the machines, so we could stop the machines on time. This was all the start of computer integrated manufacturing. I also know that they were very heavy into recycling, so they would take any bad products, anything which they took off the line, for example, for quality checks. They would take buckets off the line and measure the buckets very accurately, because of course they're making the lids somewhere else, and lids have to fit the bucket, so the size has to be accurate. That matters because the product shrinks in the temperature after forming it, so they want to make sure that there is the right size after moulding. So there's a lot of quality checks that have to go on. Those will get recycled because you can't put them back because these are food products, and the moment you touch them you can't use them for food. There are very strict rules about food processing. So yeah, these companies aren't evil. They would actually actively trying to reduce the plastic usage and plastic waste as a part of their business model. I left all that behind me. I went to go work in mobiles. I worked for mobile phone companies. I worked for companies around mobile phones, and I ended up working for a company which was into NFC, near field communication, which I've talked about before. Tapping phones to posters, tapping phones to terminals to make payments. And then I started doing things like Bluetooth low energy devices, marketing things there. But I always like to stick with the payments, so I ended up working for the payments division of the company, which then got bought by my current company I work for, which is another plastics manufacturer. We make credit cards. We make a lot of credit cards, debit cards, loyalty cards, prepaid cards, transit cards, things like Oyster card, millions of them, millions and millions and millions. And some of these are again, you get a card, it can last you 4 or 5 years. So these are good quality things. They're important things. But again, the focus is all about lean manufacturing. So it's about making sure we deliver a good quality product correctly first time with no waste. Because waste costs us money and therefore impacts our profit margin. We can't charge the customer for waste. That's a cost that we have to take on. So it's all about reducing waste. Now, the interesting thing is the challenges I see at the moment are we do use recycled plastic in our products, and actually the company I work for also uses ocean-bound plastic for some of the products as well. But the problem we have is we can't use it everywhere in the product because the brands who are buying from us don't let us. And to explain that, it's really about how recycling the plastic works. When you make plastic, it is basically white. Okay, all plastic is white, and then you add pigments to it, usually a form of a thing called master batch, which makes it very colourful, or you add, or you print on it. Okay, and we do a combination of both. But the moment you add colour or pigment to it, when you recycle it, you can't get rid of that colour very easily. It's like Play-Doh. When you start mixing the Play-Dohs up, they lose that vibrant colour and they become a very generic colour. So when you print onto them, or you then add more colour to them, you don't get the very bright, distinct colours, accurate colours coming out of recycled plastic. It's a bit like recycled cardboard is always a bit brown. That's okay. And I think the problem we have with plastic, and the problem we have in the finance industry, is that the brands are very, very, very strict about their colours. So when you get a card, the bank's logo and the MasterCard or Visa or American Express or China Union or whoever, their logo has to be exactly right. And if it's not, we can't do it. We have to actually remake the cards. We actually have to make a test card which gets approved by the brand and the scheme first before we actually are able to make the real card. And this is supposed to be about security. It's supposed to be about when a merchant, when you pass your card to the merchant, they look and go, yeah, this looks like a real card. It feels like a real card. The reality is these days is I never give my card to a merchant. I either tap the card myself or I put it in the slot myself. I never actually hand my card over, which is fantastic. It means they can't skim it. They can't do stuff with it without me noticing. So the fact that logos might be a little bit coloured out shouldn't matter anymore. So I would say that one of the things we need to do is put pressure onto brands and say, hey, we're okay with having not perfect colours. And there are some tricks. There are some tricks that we do to use recycling, and let me explain those. So when you have a credit card, it's actually layers of plastic merged together, and the central layer is called the core. So we can use recycled plastic there in some situations. There is one here that we can't. This is a card I'm going to try and hold up. I'll hold it on my number. This is a Tesco's club card for Britain. If you, I said Britain, the UK. If you notice, it's actually very cool. We actually made half these cards when we had a UK business which we sold off, so we don't do it anymore. Well, the company I work doesn't, I suspect. That building still makes the card. But the inside of the card, I know it shows on the camera, is orange. The core here is orange, very distinctive. So that would be a bad card to be recycling because of that core colour. But most cards either have a plain white or a plain black core colour to it. So you can use recycling plastic for the core, then do a shim of fresh polymer, which would be clean, that you could print onto for the surfaces. So we do that an awful lot. Same for pots. A very old trick we do is you make it like an oil canister or something. You'd use recycled plastic, you'd inject that into the inside, and on the outside inject a shim of new plastic. It has a slightly better finish, a slightly better printability to it. So that's what we have been doing, but I think to actually go further and use fully recycled plastic, we've got to put pressure on brands, say, we're okay with it looking like it's being recycled. We're okay with cards just being functional cards. I also think we need to stay away from certain technologies, and as a geek, that pains me to say. So I've seen technologies, and this is where I get fired. I've seen technologies where you make cards which have like screens in the card or fingerprint readers in the card, and they're very hard to recycle. The moment you're having a screen, we saw a card technology a while ago where you press a button on the card and it shows you a one-time pin on the actual card. Problem with that, it's got a battery in the card. You can't chop a card in half. So you have to educate people, when you finish with your credit card, you chop it up, right? We have to educate people, don't chop these up, they've got a battery in. You can't put them in landfill, they've got a battery in. So the issue there is those cards are risky. We want to stick to the simplest things. So at the moment we're doing cards, I know there's an antenna, a wire loop antenna, and I know there's a chip in there as well, but it's got a minimum amount of electrical components in for the maximum amount of usage. And indeed, the future I'm working on, a lot of the stuff I work on is actually payments with mobile phones. That's how I got into NFC payments. So use your phone, use your watch to pay. And I know our company is investing in those technologies as well, because there's the future. We have to make sure that we're being energy efficient with those futures, which means not things like Bitcoin, which are generating tons and tons of energy to do a transaction. Without mining, just the transaction energy usage alone is a lot. So that's where we are. That's the challenges we have. That we do want to use more recycled plastic. We would love to use more recycled plastic, but there are requirements on us as an organisation saying that when the customer's buying from us, there are things they would accept and don't accept. And we are working with recycling companies to do better and get better quality outputs. But there is a limit. There's a limit to what the physics and the science will allow. Once you've got pigments in the plastic, it's very, very hard to get those pigments out. You can't just bleach them, and even bleaching them could be bad, worse for the environment than just leaving the colours in there and having a slight discolour. So I would think the future for us is to have slightly more variance in the plastic, slightly more variance in your life. That sounds like fun, I think. So this is the takeaway, and I realise this 16-minute video, 17-minute video already, is first of all, teamseas.org. Please donate. What you think this story was worth and the insight into my life and what I do. But I think this is a really, really good project. I think if we can reduce plastic going into rivers by reducing going to landfills, if we can reduce plastic coming out of them, it's even better. But I think we do that in steps. So these organisations are going to help clean up the world. We can do our part, by giving them a little bit of money, price of a coffee, something like that. And at the same time, we can also do what we have to do, not just at home. I think we have to take that message to our work as well and say, hey, what can we do to reduce waste? What can we do to reduce landfill? Some of those things will have a direct impact on your bottom line. If you're reducing waste, if you're following lean manufacturing, reducing waste, reducing error rates, you will give a better service to your customer. You'll be able to do a lower cost service to the customer, which means a better profitability, a more competitive organisation as well. So I'm all about lean manufacturing. I truly believe in reducing plastic waste. As someone who works in plastic, who's been around plastic now for, 32, 33 years or something crazy like that, it's not going away anytime soon. We have to be more responsible with what we do with it. And I really wish you all the best, and hope to see you all on this channel sometime in the future. Thank you.